The sharp crack of the auctioneer's gavel echoed through the packed hall of the Willowbrook Community Center, slicing through the thick anticipation that clung to the air like a storm about to break. 7-year-old Lily Morgan clutched a small blue ceramic piggy bank tightly against her chest, her tiny fingers trembling as coins rattled inside with each terrified beat of her heart. Tears blurred her vision, turning the sea of faces around her into an indistinct, intimidating mass. Yet even through the haze, Lily's eyes sought only one figure, the tall, powerful German shepherd sitting tensely at the front of the hall, his leash gripped firmly by a uniformed handler. Bear, her father's partner, her only remaining link to a life that had been ripped apart 5 long years ago. $40,000, barked the auctioneer, his voice slicing through the murmur of the crowd. Do I hear 45? Paddles shot into the air like blades, each upward motion slashing deeper into Lily's fragile hope. She hugged the piggy bank tighter, the porcelain cool and unyielding against her fluttering heart. Across the crowded room, Bear's ears twitched, his sharp eyes scanning the audience until they locked onto Lily's small, trembling form. A low whine rumbled deep in his throat as he lurched forward suddenly, pulling hard against his leash. His handler struggled to hold him back, issuing a sharp command under his breath. The audience stirred, whispers rippling across the rows of chairs. Did you see that? He knows her. Claire Morgan, standing beside her daughter, wrapped a steadying arm around Lily's narrow shoulders, feeling the silent shudders racking the child's body. Her heart clenched painfully. This wasn't just about a dog. This was about family, about survival, about Lily's voice, the one she hadn't used in 5 years except when whispering into Bear's fur in the dead of night. 50,000, called a man seated near the front, his voice carrying a smug certainty. Claire flinched. She recognized him instantly. Travis Holt, the owner of Sentinel Security, a man known for his ruthless efficiency and bottomless pockets. Beside Claire, Rick Daniels shifted uncomfortably, his hand brushing against Claire's back. His relief was palpable, though he tried to mask it. Rick had always believed Bear was an anchor dragging Lily backward into grief, but Claire knew better. Bear was not the chain. He was the bridge. 55,000, rang out another voice, sharper, louder. Lily's breath hitched, and the ceramic piggy bank in her arms clinked again as she pressed it desperately to herself. She had saved every penny, every birthday dollar, every found coin, hoping it would someday be enough, hoping it would bring Bear home. $60,000, came a calm, unexpected voice from the back of the hall. The room fell into a sudden, pregnant silence. Heads turned. Standing alone near the double doors, wearing a worn leather jacket and a battered cowboy hat, was Adam Hayes, the reclusive rancher whose wealth was only whispered about in Willowbrook. He raised his paddle, his face unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She had no idea why Adam Hayes would involve himself, but a flicker of hope, fragile and trembling, lit inside her heart. The auctioneer's eyes darted between Holt and Hayes, sensing the rising tension. $60,000 going once, he intoned. Going twice? Silence. Sold! The gavel came down hard, the sound cracking through the room like thunder. Applause broke out, half-hearted and scattered. Yet to Lily it was as though the world had gone still. She stood frozen, staring across the room where Bear sat, his gaze unwaveringly locked with hers, a solemn understanding passing silently between them. Adam Hayes had won the auction, but what did that mean for Bear, and for her? Lily's fingers tightened around the piggy bank, the cool surface biting into her skin. She blinked back a fresh wave of tears, her silent prayer rising into the rafters above. Please, she thought, please don't let this be goodbye. The soft whisper of falling snow brushed against the frosted window panes of the Morgan home, casting a muted silver glow across the dimly lit living room. Lily sat curled in the corner of the bay window, her forehead resting against the cold glass. Her small hands clutched the worn stuffed bunny she had carried since infancy, its once bright fur now faded and threadbare. Outside, the world lay silent beneath a heavy quilt of white, the streets of Willowbrook blanketed in untouched purity. Inside, the house seemed frozen too, suspended in a hush that was both peaceful and unbearably heavy. Claire Morgan stood silently in the doorway, watching her daughter with a heart so full it ached. Her fingers tightened around the steaming mug of tea in her hands, more for something to hold on to than for warmth. 5 years. It had been 5 years since the knock at the door had shattered their lives. 5 years since Officer Ben Morgan, husband, father, and pillar of their small family, had died in a drug raid gone horribly wrong. Bear had survived, but something vital inside him had died alongside Ben. So had Lily's voice. In the agonizing days and months that followed, Claire had fought with every ounce of strength she possessed to hold their fractured world together. Therapy sessions, support groups, endless late nights whispering reassurances into Lily's hair. Nothing had cracked the shell of silence that grief had built around her daughter. Nothing except Bear. Claire's gaze drifted to the worn photograph on the mantel. In it, Ben knelt proudly beside Bear, both of them beaming at the camera, the glint of Ben's badge catching the sun. Claire swallowed hard against the lump rising in her throat. Bear wasn't just a dog to Lily. He was her father's last promise made flesh. Rick Daniels had entered their lives 2 years later. At first, his steady presence had been a balm, a hand to hold through the worst storms. Claire had dared to hope that in time, Rick could help rebuild the pieces of their broken family. But Rick didn't understand. To him, Bear was a chain, anchoring Lily to a grief she should have outgrown. Claire had tried to explain, tried to make him see that some wounds didn't heal cleanly. But Rick saw only what he wanted, a future unburdened by the weight of the past. Claire's thoughts were interrupted by the quiet vibration of her phone on the side table. Frowning, she set her mug down and picked it up. An unknown number. Hesitating only briefly, she answered. "Hello." A deep, calm voice responded. "Mrs. Morgan, this is Adam Hayes. I believe we need to talk." Claire straightened, glancing instinctively toward Lily. "About what?" she asked, wary. "About Bear," Adam said, "and about Travis Holt." Claire's heart skipped a beat. She pressed the phone closer to her ear, her body going rigid with a mix of hope and fear. "Can you meet me at Miller's Diner?" "This afternoon." The line went dead before Claire could answer. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the silent phone in her hand, the soft hiss of the falling snow filling the space around her. The familiar chime above the door of Miller's Diner jingled as Claire stepped inside, brushing snowflakes from her coat. The rich aroma of coffee and fried food wrapped around her, a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. She spotted Adam Hayes immediately. He sat alone in a corner booth, his broad shoulders hunched slightly as he nursed a cup of coffee. He stood as she approached, removing his weathered hat and offering a polite, if somber, nod. "Mrs. Morgan," he greeted, his voice low, roughened by years of sun and hard work. "Claire, please," she replied automatically, slipping into the seat across from him. A waitress appeared, pouring Claire a cup of coffee without being asked, sensing the tension between them. As the waitress moved away, Adam leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "I imagine you're wondering why I got involved," he said without preamble. Claire nodded warily, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "You're not exactly known for getting involved." Adam's mouth twisted in a brief, humorless smile. "That's true," he said, "but some things you can't walk away from. Not when you know the truth." Claire's stomach twisted into a tight knot. "What truth?" Adam's gaze was steady, unwavering. "Your husband, Ben, he was investigating Theragen Pharmaceuticals before he died. You knew that much, right?" Claire nodded slowly. Ben had mentioned the company in passing, offhand comments about shady dealings and dangerous shortcuts, but he had shielded her from the worst of it, trying to protect her. "My daughter, Emily," Adam continued, his voice tightening, "worked at Theragen. She discovered things, unauthorized chemical trials, environmental violations, cover-ups. She tried to blow the whistle." Claire's breath caught. 3 weeks after she filed her report, Adam said, voice low and filled with pain, "she died. Car accident. Officially." Claire's hands tightened around her coffee cup, knuckles whitening. "You think it wasn't an accident," she said, barely above a whisper. "I know it wasn't," Adam said. "And Ben found out too. That's why he was killed." The diner seemed to tilt around her, the floor rolling under her feet. Claire fought to steady her breathing. "And Travis Holt," she forced out. Adam's face darkened. Holt's company just secured a major contract with Theragen. Security, containment, damage control, and Bear, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Bear was trained to detect specific chemical compounds. Compounds Theragen wanted to keep buried. Claire stared at him, the implications crashing down like an avalanche. "They don't want Bear as a pet," she said numbly. "They want to control him, or silence him." Adam nodded grimly. "If Holt gets his hands on Bear, it won't end with a nice kennel in a fenced yard." Claire's hands shook as she lowered her cup to the table. All this time, they had been fighting not just for Lily's healing, but for Ben's legacy, for the truth he had died to uncover. Adam reached into his jacket and slid a small, sealed envelope across the table. "These are copies of some of Emily's findings. It's not enough to take down Theragen yet, but it's proof. And Bear. Bear remembers. His training, his alerts, their evidence." Claire stared at the envelope, feeling the weight of it settle heavily in her lap. "Why are you giving this to me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Because you're the only one willing to fight for the right reasons," Adam said simply, "and because Lily deserves to know that her father's death wasn't meaningless." Claire blinked rapidly, forcing down the tears that burned at the back of her eyes. She thought of Lily, her silent, grieving daughter, and of Bear, the one creature who had never left her side. "I won't let them win," Claire said, her voice shaking but resolute. Adam nodded once, firm and unwavering. "We'll fight them together." Claire tucked the envelope into her coat, her fingers brushing against the cold glass of her wedding ring as she did. As she left the diner, the snowfall thickened, cloaking the town in white. But Claire's steps were sure, her heart burning with a fierce new purpose. She had been battered by grief, paralyzed by helplessness. But no more. They would bring Bear home, and they would finish what Ben had started, no matter the cost. The Morgan house was steeped in an unsettling stillness when Claire returned that evening, the hush almost accusatory. Snow melted in small puddles beneath her boots as she shrugged off her coat and hung it carefully by the door. She could hear the faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen, the low murmur of Rick's voice. Claire hesitated, the envelope from Adam Hayes burning like a brand against her ribs. Something prickled at the back of her mind, a whisper of unease she couldn't ignore. Quietly, she stepped closer to the kitchen doorway, staying just out of sight. Rick stood at the counter, his back to her, one hand braced against the marble while he spoke into his phone in a hushed, urgent tone. "She's getting desperate," he was saying, "but don't worry, I'm working on it. I'll convince her to stand down." Claire's breath froze in her lungs. There was a pause on the line, a muffled voice. Travis Holt, she realized with a sick twist of her gut. "She's stubborn," Rick muttered. "But Lily's fragile. If we can push the right buttons, Claire might do what's best for her." Claire felt her hands curl into fists at her sides, trembling not with fear, but with a cold, furious clarity. She stepped into the kitchen deliberately, her boots striking the tile with sharp finality. Rick turned, the blood draining from his face when he saw her. Claire crossed the room in 2 strides and slammed the sealed envelope onto the countertop between them. "What is this, Rick?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. Rick opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "It's not what you think," he began. "It's exactly what I think," Claire snapped, her voice slicing through the room. "You're working with Holt. You're trying to sell Bear out. Sell Lily out." Rick's face crumpled with something that might have been guilt, or maybe just fear of being caught. "I'm trying to help her," he insisted. "Claire, you have to see. Holding on to Bear is keeping her trapped in the past. We could finally move forward." Claire stared at him, stunned by the sheer audacity of the lie. "Move forward?" she echoed bitterly. "By tearing away the only thing that gives her hope? By betraying everything Ben fought for? Everything he died for?" Rick's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists. "I'm trying to save us," he shouted. "You're not saving anyone," Claire said quietly, the fury draining into a deep, aching sadness. "You're destroying what little we have left." Rick looked away, unable to meet her gaze. The silence stretched long and brittle between them, heavy with everything they had lost and could never regain. Claire picked up the envelope again, slipping it back into her coat pocket. "If you can't stand with us," she said, her voice trembling, "then get out of our way." Rick didn't answer. He simply sagged against the counter, defeated as Claire turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing through the hollow spaces of their home. Upstairs, she found Lily asleep in her bed, her small body curled around a stuffed bunny, her thumb brushing absently against the worn badge of her father pinned to the bunny's ear. Claire knelt beside her daughter, smoothing the tangled hair away from her forehead, her hand lingering with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "I promise you, baby," she whispered, "no one will take him from you. I swear it." Lily stirred but didn't wake, her face relaxing into the soft innocence of dreams. Claire sat there for a long time, guarding her daughter through the deepening night, the storm outside mirroring the one gathering within her heart. The next morning, the sun fought a losing battle against the thick, low clouds blanketing Willowbrook. The roads were slick with ice, the sidewalks barely shoveled, but Claire didn't care. She gripped the steering wheel tightly as she pulled into the cracked asphalt lot behind Miller's Diner once again, her resolve hardening with every passing second. Adam Hayes was already waiting, leaning against his old pickup truck, arms crossed against the cold. His hat was pulled low over his eyes, but he straightened the moment he saw Claire approaching. "You came," he said simply, no trace of surprise in his voice. "I'm not backing down," Claire replied, slamming the car door behind her. Adam nodded once, approving. Inside, the diner was nearly empty, save for a few elderly locals nursing mugs of black coffee. Claire and Adam slid into the same corner booth they had used the day before, the worn leather squeaking under their weight. Claire placed the envelope Adam had given her on the table between them. "I read everything last night," she said quietly. "Emily, Ben, they deserved better." Adam's jaw tightened, a flicker of pain crossing his rugged features. "They did," he said. Claire leaned forward, her voice low and fierce. "I want to finish what Ben started. I want to expose Theragen. I want Holt to know he didn't bury the truth." Adam studied her for a long moment, then gave a slow, approving nod. "I was hoping you'd say that," he said. He pulled out a battered notebook and slid it across the table. "I've been keeping records," Adam continued. "Names, dates, contracts Holt's firm secured after Ben's death, suspicious donations to city officials, cover-ups. It's not enough on its own, but it's a start." Claire opened the notebook, her fingers trembling slightly as she flipped through the handwritten pages. "This is dangerous," she murmured, feeling the weight of the responsibility settle onto her shoulders. "It is," Adam agreed, "but it's more dangerous to let them win." Claire closed the notebook carefully. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, "for Lily, for Ben, for Emily." Adam gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, a warrior recognizing another. "We'll need to move fast," he said. "Once Holt realizes we're onto him, he'll come at us harder." Claire met his gaze squarely. "Let him," she said. "I'm not afraid of him." A waitress approached, refilling their coffee mugs with practiced efficiency, oblivious to the storm brewing at the corner booth. Claire wrapped her hands around the mug, drawing strength from its warmth. "There's going to be a hearing," she said. "The town council. They'll decide if Bear can stay with us permanently." Adam nodded thoughtfully. "Holt will fight that tooth and nail," he said. "He'll use every connection, every trick in the book." Claire's smile was grim. "Then we'll give him a fight he won't forget." Adam's eyes twinkled briefly with something like pride. "I'll be there," he promised. "We all will." Claire thought of Lily, her sweet, silent daughter, and felt a fierce surge of love and determination. They had already lost too much. This time they would not lose. Not Bear, not Lily's voice, not Ben's legacy. Claire slid the notebook into her bag, along with the sealed envelope. She had a war to fight, and she was ready. As they stood and gathered their things, Adam reached into his jacket and handed her a small, heavy brass token, a police badge, old and worn. "Found this among Emily's things," he said quietly. "Thought you might want it." Claire turned it over in her hand, the weight of it grounding her. "Thank you," she whispered. Adam nodded once, then pushed open the diner door, stepping out into the gray, cold morning. Claire followed, the badge clutched tightly in her hand, her breath clouding in the icy air. Across the parking lot, the distant chime of church bells rang out, faint but clear, a call to battle. Claire answered it silently, her chin lifting against the biting wind. For Lily, for Bear, for Ben. This time, they would not lose. The morning of the auction dawned bitterly cold, the sky a heavy slab of gray pressing down on Willowbrook. Inside the Morgan house, tension coiled like a living thing. Lily sat at the kitchen table in her best dress, a soft blue one her father had loved, and clutched her small blue piggy bank so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her eyes, wide and solemn, never left the window, watching the empty driveway, the silent road beyond. Claire moved around the kitchen with nervous energy, brushing Lily's hair into two neat braids with trembling fingers, fastening the blue ribbons just so. Every movement, every breath, was careful, deliberate. Today mattered more than anything. Rick stood awkwardly by the door, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket, his face pale. The fragile truce between him and Claire held, but just barely. He had made his choice. At the 11th hour, Rick had withdrawn his support from Holt and donated the last of his savings toward Lily's cause. A small gesture, a necessary one. The drive to the Willowbrook Community Center passed in tense silence, the tires crunching over salted roads, the landscape a blur of white and gray. Outside the center, news crews gathered, their cameras trained on the entrance. Reporters clutched notepads and microphones, their breaths steaming in the frigid air. Inside, the hall buzzed with anticipation. Rows of folding chairs filled quickly with townsfolk, police officers, donors, and curious onlookers. A long stage stood at the front, framed by banners reading, "Annual Law Enforcement Charity Auction." The smell of coffee and old wood varnish hung heavy in the air, but Lily saw none of it. Her gaze locked immediately on the far side of the room where Bear stood near the stage, held loosely by Officer Ramirez. The dog's ears pricked up the moment he spotted her. His tail gave a tentative wag. Claire squeezed Lily's hand. "Stay close, sweetheart," she murmured. The auction began with the usual offerings, gift baskets, vacation packages, signed memorabilia. But there was a crackle in the air, a rising tension, as the final item was announced. "Next up," the auctioneer declared, his voice booming across the hall, "K9 Bear, 7 years old, fully trained in narcotics detection, search and rescue, and suspect apprehension. Starting bid, $2,500. Claire raised her paddle immediately. "Do I hear 3,000? The auctioneer called. Almost instantly, a paddle shot up from Travis Holt's table. He lounged casually between two of his associates, wearing an expensive navy suit and an expression of utter disdain. He didn't even glance at Lily. $3,000 from bidder 42, the auctioneer confirmed. $3,500, Adam Hayes countered without hesitation. The bids rose quickly. $4,000, $5,000, $6,000. Each number slamming into Claire's chest like a hammer blow. Rick laid a steady hand on her shoulder as she raised her paddle again. $6,500, she called. Lily opened her piggy bank quietly beside her, carefully counting out coins and crumpled bills, her tiny hands shaking. She laid each dollar, each cent, on her lap with trembling precision. $7,000, Holt barked. $10,000, Adam answered calmly. The room gasped at the sudden jump. Murmurs rippled across the rows. Claire's heart thundered against her ribs. They were nearing the absolute limit of what they could afford. $12,500, Holt countered, smirking faintly. $15,000, Adam raised again. Claire's throat tightened. This wasn't just a battle for a dog. This was a battle for Lily's soul. $20,000, Holt called out. The air shifted. A collective breath held. Adam stood slowly, his expression unreadable. $35,000, he said clearly, his voice slicing through the tension like a blade. The auctioneer blinked in surprise, the crowd gasping. $35,000 from bidder 28, he confirmed. Do I hear 40? Holt's smile faltered. One of his associates leaned in, whispering urgently. After a tense moment, Holt raised his paddle again. $45,000. Claire's vision swam. There was no way they could match that. Then, before anyone could move, a small, shaking voice pierced the tension. Wait! The entire hall fell silent. Every head turned. There in the middle of the aisle stood Lily, small, fragile, but unbreakably determined. She clutched her shattered piggy bank in her hands, coins slipping through her fingers and scattering like fallen stars across the floor. I want to add my money, she said, her voice trembling but clear. The auctioneer hesitated, clearly caught off guard. Miss, this is an adult event. She's a bidder, Adam interrupted firmly. And this is her savings. Claire's heart shattered into a million pieces at the sight of her daughter standing there. So brave, so heartbreakingly earnest. Lily bent down carefully and picked up a $1 bill from the wreckage of her piggy bank. This is everything I have, she said, her voice breaking. Please, he's not just a dog. He's my daddy's partner. He's all I have left. The room was utterly, absolutely still. Even Travis Holt looked momentarily thrown off balance. The auctioneer cleared his throat awkwardly. Current high bid is $45,000, he announced, his voice softer now. Do I hear more? Adam raised his paddle. 60,000, he said without hesitation. Gasps filled the room. Holt stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. 70,000, he barked. Before the auctioneer could even blink, Adam raised his paddle again. $75,000. The hall exploded in murmurs, the tension thick and electric. The auctioneer looked at Holt expectantly, but Holt hesitated. One of his associates leaned in again, whispering furiously. Holt's jaw tightened. The auctioneer raised his gavel high. Going once? Bear, sensing the shift in energy, whined sharply and pulled against his leash. Officer Ramirez held him back, but Bear planted himself solidly, his body language unmistakable. He wasn't going anywhere without Lily. Going twice. Claire felt her breath catch painfully in her throat. Sold! The auctioneer cried, bringing the gavel down with a final, echoing crack. Applause broke out, this time genuine and heartfelt. Claire dropped to her knees as Lily rushed into Bear's open embrace, the dog immediately pressing his massive body against her protectively, whining low and deep in his chest. Tears streamed freely down Claire's face as she wrapped her arms around them both, holding on as if the world could rip them away at any second. Rick stood nearby, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, no longer trying to hide his emotion. Bear was theirs. Lily was home. But Claire knew it wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. Just as the applause began to fade and the first tears of joy dried on Claire's cheeks, a sudden shift in the room's atmosphere made her spine stiffen. A low, authoritative voice rang out across the hall. Not so fast. Every head turned as Sheriff David Coleman made his way up the center aisle, his boots striking the worn floorboards with deliberate, heavy steps. His uniform was impeccable, his expression grim. Claire's heart plunged into her stomach. Sheriff Coleman stepped up onto the stage, raising a hand to quiet the room. I understand how emotional this moment is, he began, his voice carrying easily. But departmental policy requires a formal decommissioning process before a K-9 unit can be placed into private care. A ripple of confusion and murmured concern swept through the audience. Claire rose slowly to her feet, pulling Lily and Bear protectively close to her side. But she won the auction, someone called from the back. Sheriff Coleman nodded, acknowledging the point. Yes, the winning bid stands. Ownership is pending, but according to departmental regulations, K-9 Bear is still classified as an active service animal. He must be formally retired by the town council before final placement can be approved. Claire felt the ground tilt beneath her. Another obstacle. Another fight. She saw the way Lily's small fingers curled desperately into Bear's fur, the sheer terror flashing through her daughter's eyes at the thought of being separated again. Claire forced her voice to remain calm, steady. What happens now? She asked. Coleman's expression softened slightly. The council will hold a special hearing, he explained. Given the circumstances, it'll be expedited, likely within the next few days. And until then, Claire pressed. The sheriff hesitated. Until then, Bear remains in your temporary custody, he said carefully. But his official transfer of ownership will be decided by a council vote. Claire exhaled slowly, tension bleeding from her shoulders, but only a fraction. Temporary was better than nothing. It bought them time. Adam Hayes stepped forward, his presence a solid wall of support at Claire's side. "We'll be there," Adam said firmly. "We'll make sure the council hears the whole story." The sheriff studied them both for a long moment before nodding. "I hope so," he said quietly. With a final glance at Lily and Bear, still pressed tightly together, as if afraid the world might pull them apart, Sheriff Coleman turned and left the stage, his deputies trailing behind him. The crowd began to disperse slowly, buzzing with curiosity and whispers. Claire knelt beside Lily, brushing the child's wind-chilled cheek with the back of her hand. "We're not done yet, sweetheart," she whispered, "but we're closer. So much closer." Lily nodded solemnly, her arms locked tight around Bear's massive neck. Rick appeared beside them, his face drawn but determined. "I'll help however I can," he said, voice rough. "I swear it." Claire met his gaze for a long, searching moment. There was no easy forgiveness, but there could be trust, rebuilt, one stone at a time. "Then stand with us," she said simply. Rick nodded. Together they gathered their things. Together they stepped out into the crisp winter air. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in 5 long, brutal years, Claire felt something stir in her chest. A fragile, stubborn hope, and she would fight to protect it. For Lily, for Bear, for the truth. The Willowbrook Town Hall had never seen a turnout like this. Rows upon rows of folding chairs were crammed into the old wood-paneled room, every seat filled with townsfolk, off-duty officers, reporters, and curious citizens. The smell of old paper, coffee, and worn leather filled the air, thick with anticipation. At the front of the room stood a long table draped in a faded blue cloth. Behind it sat the town council, 5 members representing Willowbrook's government. In the center sat Councilwoman Teresa Blake, a woman known for her sharp mind and unflinching fairness. Sheriff Coleman occupied a chair to the left, alongside representatives from the District Legal Board. At the very center of the room, facing the council, sat Lily. She looked impossibly small in the heavy oak chair, Bear sitting loyally at her feet, his head resting against her knees. Claire sat directly beside her, a steady hand resting on Lily's back. Adam Hayes sat 2 rows behind, his arms crossed over his chest, his face carved from stone. Rick Daniels hovered near the aisle, visibly anxious but resolute. The low hum of voices faded as Councilwoman Blake tapped her gavel sharply. "This proceeding concerns the placement of K9 Bear, retired service dog, and the petition to assign him into private civilian care with the Morgan family," she announced. "Given the extraordinary circumstances surrounding this case, we are here to determine whether an exception to department policy is warranted." She paused, her gaze sweeping the crowded room. "We will hear statements from concerned parties before deliberating." Sheriff Coleman stood first. "With all due respect," he said, voice professional but firm, "K9 Bear is a highly trained, specialized service animal. Traditionally, these animals are retired into the custody of certified handlers to ensure their training, temperament, and safety protocols are maintained. Allowing a civilian minor to assume custody, no matter how compelling the emotional argument, presents serious liability concerns." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Claire tightened her hand on Lily's back. Councilwoman Blake nodded gravely. "Thank you, Sheriff." She glanced toward Claire's side of the room. "Mrs. Morgan," she said, "you may present your witnesses." Claire rose to her feet, heart hammering in her chest, but her voice when it came was steady. "I call Rick Daniels," she said. Rick swallowed hard, shooting Claire a fleeting, grateful glance before making his way to the stand. He cleared his throat. "I'll be honest," Rick began. "I didn't understand at first. I thought Bear was holding Lily back, keeping her locked in grief." He looked at Lily, small, brave, clutching Bear's collar with white-knuckled fingers. "I was wrong," Rick said simply. "Bear didn't trap her in the past. He gave her a bridge back to life. Without him, Lily wouldn't be here today, sitting in front of you." Rick's voice cracked slightly, but he pressed on. I tried to take that from her once. I won't make that mistake again. He sat down heavily, wiping his palms against his trousers. Claire nodded to Dr. Julia Winters, Lily's longtime therapist. Dr. Winters approached, her clipboard tucked under one arm. Lily Morgan exhibits symptoms of selective mutism triggered by severe trauma, she explained to the council. Traditional therapies achieve minimal progress. However, documented interactions with Bear show significant emotional regulation, verbal communication, and trust-building behaviors. She looked directly at the council. Removing Bear now would likely cause severe regression and emotional harm. Conversely, maintaining the bond provides Lily with a therapeutic lifeline. Councilwoman Blake nodded thoughtfully, taking notes. Claire's next move was riskier, but necessary. I would like to introduce Adam Hayes, she said. A murmur swept the room. Adam stood, making his way to the stand with heavy, deliberate steps. Once there, he reached into his coat and produced a thick file, placing it carefully on the table. This is why Travis Holt wants Bear, Adam said, voice cutting through the tension like a whip crack. Councilwoman Blake frowned slightly. Explain. Adam opened the file, displaying a series of whistleblower reports, training documents, and internal memos. My daughter, Emily Hayes, worked at Theragen Pharmaceuticals, Adam said quietly. She discovered illegal chemical experiments, reported them, and died 3 weeks later in a so-called accident. The room went dead silent. Deputy Ben Morgan, Lily's father, was investigating the same company, Adam continued. Bear was trained to detect specific compounds tied to Theragen's violations. Holt, who recently secured a security contract with Theragen, wants Bear not for protection, but to erase evidence. There was a loud clatter as someone at Holt's table dropped a pen. Councilwoman Blake's eyes narrowed sharply. Mr. Holt, do you care to respond to these allegations? She asked, voice as sharp as broken glass. Holt's lawyer rose stiffly, stammering about confidentiality, slander, and pending investigations. Claire barely heard him. Her focus was on Lily, who sat frozen, her fingers buried deep in Bear's fur. Councilwoman Blake banged her gavel once to restore order. Enough, she said crisply. We will take these claims under advisement. She turned her attention to the smallest witness in the room. Miss Morgan, she said gently, would you like to speak? Claire held her breath. Slowly, Lily rose to her feet. She clutched a crumpled dollar bill in one hand, the last remnant of her broken piggy bank. She stepped forward. When she spoke, her voice was small but clear, carrying across the silent room. Bear, he's not just a dog, Lily said. He's my daddy's partner. He helps me talk. He helps me remember. He keeps me safe. Tears shimmered in Claire's eyes, but she stayed silent, willing her daughter every ounce of strength she had. I don't want another dog, Lily whispered. I want Bear. For a long, breathless moment, no one spoke. Then Councilwoman Blake nodded gravely. Thank you, Lily, she said. The council withdrew into a private chamber to deliberate. The room erupted into hushed speculation, reporters scribbling furiously, officers murmuring in tight circles. Claire sat back down beside Lily and Bear, her hand never leaving her daughter's back. 10 minutes passed. 20. 30. Finally, the council returned. Councilwoman Blake rose to her feet, her face unreadable. In light of the extraordinary circumstances surrounding this case, she began, and the overwhelming evidence of the therapeutic bond between Miss Morgan and Canine Bear, as well as concerns raised regarding third-party interests, she paused, letting the weight of the moment stretch taut. The town council votes unanimously to approve the permanent placement of Canine Bear with the Morgan family. The room exploded into applause. Claire gasped, laughing through her tears as she swept Lily and Bear into a fierce embrace. Rick clapped her on the back, his eyes suspiciously bright. Adam simply nodded once, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. Councilwoman Blake banged her gavel again. Furthermore, she added, Bear's status will be updated from retired K9 to certified therapy dog. He will continue to serve, not in the field, but in the hearts and healing of children like Lily. Claire wept openly now, hugging her daughter and Bear tighter. Travis Holt and his lawyers stood and hurried from the building, their heads bowed, their plans crumbling around them like dust. As the crowd surged forward to congratulate them, Claire whispered into Lily's hair, "We did it, baby," she said. "We brought him home. And this time, nothing and no one would tear them apart again." The sun dipped low behind the snow-dusted hills as the Morgan family returned home, the last golden rays of the day splintering through the barren trees. The house, once heavy with silence and sorrow, now felt alive, vibrating with warmth and hope. Claire opened the front door, ushering Lily and Bear inside. Bear immediately did a wide loop around the living room, his nails clicking on the worn hardwood floor, before circling back and settling heavily by Lily's side, as if he had never left. Lily dropped to the floor, wrapping her arms around his thick neck, her face buried in his fur. Bear let out a low, contented sigh, resting his massive head against her shoulder. Claire leaned against the doorframe for a moment, simply watching, committing the image to memory. Her daughter, whole again. Her family, healing. Rick entered behind them, carrying a small, carefully wrapped box in his hands. He hesitated near the doorway, then cleared his throat awkwardly. "I have something for you, Lily," he said. Lily looked up, her wide brown eyes curious but cautious. Rick knelt down, setting the box in front of her. "It was your dad's," he said softly. "I thought you should have it." Lily unwrapped the box carefully, revealing a small, worn brass compass. The metal was scuffed and aged, the needle still spinning slightly as she tilted it in her hand. Claire moved closer, kneeling beside her. "Your dad carried that every day," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He used to say that no matter how lost he felt, that compass would always lead him home." Lily traced the edges of the compass with trembling fingers. Rick smiled gently. "Just like Bear found his way back to you," he said. Tears filled Claire's eyes, but they were different now. No longer born of grief, but of something rawer, purer, gratitude, hope. Lily clutched the compass tightly in one hand and Bear's fur in the other. She glanced up at Claire, her expression serious. "Are we safe now?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Claire brushed a hand across Lily's cheek, smoothing a stray wisp of hair away. "We're safe, sweetheart," she said. "We're home." Later, after dinner was cleared away and the house had settled into a comfortable, sleepy quiet, Claire found Lily and Bear curled together on the porch swing. The stars winked into existence above them, the air crisp and cold, the faint scent of pine carried on the breeze. Lily sat with the compass resting in her lap, one hand absently stroking Bear's thick fur. Bear's ears flicked toward every sound, the chirp of a distant frog, the rustle of the wind, but he stayed firmly planted at Lily's side, a silent sentinel. Claire stepped onto the porch, wrapping a soft blanket around Lily's shoulders. She sat beside them, listening to the quiet. "You know," Claire said, her voice soft, "your dad always said Bear could find anything, or anyone, that was lost." Lily looked up at the sky, then down at the compass, and finally at Bear. "I think Daddy was right," she whispered. Claire smiled, her heart full to bursting. Together they sat in the gentle darkness, the old porch swing creaking rhythmically beneath them, as the world turned quietly on around them. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Claire believed, with every beat of her heart, that they were exactly where they were meant to be. Home. Hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of Lily and Bear's incredible journey. See you in the next video.